Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss After the Hunt, starring Julia Roberts, Ao Ibabiri, forgive me if I said that wrong, Andrew Garfield, Michael Stolberg, and Chloe Savigny, excuse me, directed by Luca Guadagnino. Now, welcome back, Luca Guadagnino. After I reviewed his films a couple of times, starting with what was it? I forgot. But and then I went back. Challengers, and then I came back for Queer, and then now I'm back with this film. So yeah, let's and this thing is a total tank, like it's a failure of a movie. But let's see if because nobody saw it, if you know what I mean. So let's see what nobody saw in the theaters for this. Let's get into it. We start with the clicking of a clock that goes on for about 3 or 4 times in this movie, as the year that takes place is in 2009, as it's happening in Yale, excuse me. When we first meet Alma, played by Julia Roberts, waking up thanks to her husband Frederick, played by Michael Stolberg, as she is a professor at Yale and she goes to work during the day and at night gets prepared for a party with Hank, played by Andrew Garfield, and her student Maggie, played by Ao Ibabiri, forgive me if I said that wrong, who was the voice of April O'Neil in the recent animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, and Envy and Inside Out 2, and is on The Bear, which I've never watched, with Hank flirting with Maggie as he comes off like a douchebag in this scene he's in for this whole movie. And they party while Maggie is getting uncomfortable with the topic he's talking about, and the dialogue is sometimes very awkward for reasons I don't wish to get into. And she uses the restroom while Hank continues to talk inappropriately, and the performances are horrendous. Despite Julia Roberts is good, but not great in my opinion. And also, stop with the score being so distracting. After watching one battle after another, I'm done with scores that are super fucking distracting. Maggie is in the restroom for a while until she comes out, and while Hank is smoking a cigarette, and what reminds me, and one's reminding me of Cigaweed from Rush Hour 1. And she makes a point about being a man versus a woman as far as society is concerned. And the party scene goes on for a bit too long, and this is a long movie at 2 hours and 19 minutes, and I felt every minute of it because the pacing in this is slow as hell. And after the party, Alma and Frederick talk about how Maggie is a lesbian, and he believes she's in love with Alma, and she leaves the place for the night while Hank smokes a cigarette in the hall when Alma tells him no smoking in the hall. As they leave, and Alma pays their maid and gets a strange feeling in her stomach, as the other performers were pretentious. Alma pukes again the next day in the toilet, and I honestly thought she was going to shit her pants. It wasn't very funny, as I was waiting for it and she was going to her class, noticing Maggie wasn't there for the day, and there's a good reason for it. It'll be explained in a few minutes, while Alma joins Hank for a drink as a friend at their local school bar, and it didn't feel like it at one point. He kisses her on the cheek and in the head, and I'm thinking, this motherfucker is a creep. As this performance is, and it tells based on the acting by Andrew Garfield shows, which which is super unfortunate because isn't the rule of filmmaking show don't tell? As this bothered me from while Maggie comes by Alma's place to tell her she was sexually assaulted by Hank, while the score in this scene was fucking distracting. Like I couldn't focus on the dialogue because of the goddamn score in that scene. After Maggie walked away from going inside Alma's apartment, Alma wonders what the fuck she just heard, and she was just caught off guard and comes home to Frederick, and they have no chemistry, and by definition I mean Julia Roberts and Michael Stolberg, as I can feel their flat chemistry in it as it falls flat. While Alma doesn't know what to think of what happened to Maggie, because she feels cold as the character felt cold, based on the acting by Julia Roberts, and we move on to Alma going to a diner to meet with Hank as he confesses what he did as false, and he lies about it. With the score once again was super distracting, and my message to director Luca Guadagnino: stop making distracting choices. And same with Yorgo Lanthimos. He's got a movie coming up because it's bothering me from the get-go. I mean, Jesus Christ. Alma doesn't believe Hank to the point he tells the boss about it. And we move on to Hank coming up to Alma as he does Maggie, and the shot in that scene was terrible, as Maggie wants Alma to testify against Hank because she wants to press charges against him, and while she apologizes to Maggie about her reaction as she was in disbelief, and this scene was painfully shot and acted as the cinematography looked awful in this movie. Absolutely awful. And I can't believe Luca Guadagnino, who was an Oscar nominated director, is going downhill from there, as he deserves better than this. Maybe not, but. Alma is home while the music plays loudly, and we move on to the next day as Hank interrupts her classroom to tell her he was fired and makes a scene with her and makes himself look like a pretentious ass by staring at the accuser, who happens to be Maggie, and leaves the building all fucked up while Alma looks for Maggie and finds her hanging out next to a tree and talks to her calmly and invites her to her place about it over to talk about it over at dinner, as she'll cook, as this is turning into a psychodrama. And that I could barely stand, and I'm only an hour into this movie at this point. Alma and Frederick have Maggie over for dinner, and they talk about what she's studying, and Frederick leaves the room with his dinner and leave Alma and Maggie talking about the serious situation as a reporter came up to Maggie and gives her a business card, and Alma warns her not to say anything about the situation or else she'll become radioactive. But Maggie decides to go with it anyways, with or without Alma. And we move on to the next morning with Alma waking up from her phone alarm and feels exhausted and listens to calm music until Hank calls her twice. But she doesn't answer and is approached by a friend and have a drink at the local bar about how Maggie talked to Kim. And at this point, I'm just bored out of my fucking mind. Alma leaves the bar looking like an ass as the next morning comes and Frederick leaves with giving Alma an aspirin, and he learns Maggie told on Hank in an article as we get the ticking of the clock again for a second time, and I'm like, oh really, come on, that was a poor choice of director Luca Guadagnino, but he does this a few times in this movie. And Maggie is getting congratulated for the article, and she tells her roommate while Alma goes to a random place that I believe was her own apartment. And I also thought, are she and Frederick married? As that confused me. And again, not a good choice by director Luca Guadagnino. And despite I don't like too many of his films, as Challenges is his best work in my opinion, he just doesn't make good choices as a director, and this has some talented actors, but the story was executed rather poorly. Alma pukes again while the score felt distracting, and that scene was, as well as I once again thought she was going to shit herself, as I waited this whole movie thinking, if she takes a dump while puking, maybe this movie would have picked up a bit, which sounds disgusting. While she meets with her psychiatrist, Dr. Kim Sayers, played by Chloe Savigny, as Alma prescribes some pills to herself, which is drug abuse, and no wonder for this R rating, despite it doesn't say drug use as part of the reason for it. And she comes back to Frederick and goes to sleep with him, and next morning comes and he blasts the music again. And what is it with him and blasting music? And this could be in the editing room floor, and like I said earlier ago, I felt every minute of the pace of this movie. Maggie texts Alma to talk with her and see how she's holding up, and she says she calls Kim and tries constantly while Alma meets with Maggie in the middle of the parking lot as she threatens her, and Alma tells Maggie to leave her the fuck alone, but she walks away as Alma calls Kim about Maggie and leaves her another fucking message. And we move on to Alma teaching a class and makes herself look like a pretentious ass while teaching a history class. And I just don't like these fucking characters, as they come off like assholes from the get-go, as this isn't Luca Guadagnino's best work, nor is it his worst. We get to one more clicking of the teachers of the clicking as the teachers at Yale are having a meeting, and Alma stays for the longest to talk with the boss about her drug prescribed as not being Kim's signature, and her 10-year contract is paused indefinitely, while Alma says to Maggie she wants to talk with her, while Alex, her roommate, says it's not a good idea, but they talk alone until Maggie slaps Alma in the face, and she could be arrested for assault on a teacher. And what the fuck was going on in Guadagnino's mind is what bothers me in this movie. At this point, as Alma gets an alcoholic beverage for her apartment and sees Hank there one last time, and they have a drink, and she tells him he was right about Maggie, and he kisses her, and she forces him out of the apartment. And what was the point of that scene? As it could have been in the editing room floor, honestly, as it took way too long. Alma gets a phone call that she never picked up and goes to sleep as she gets a call her car later. Gets to her car, excuse me. In this scene, she sees people that were just talking and going back to Yale and is encountered by some protesters about her until she faints while trying to get some quiet time, as was an article about her being written by Maggie, which is super fucked up, as she faints and hospitalized. And do I care? Absolutely not, as I don't care for how the rest of the movie goes. Frederick visits Alma at the hospital to keep an eye on her, and as he says, it'll be forgotten at some point in her time. And he reads her about the article of her request, and it sounds like Maggie felt failed by Alma when we learned Alma bullshitted about her father's friend sexually assaulted her, and she says they were in love and it felt like real to her. And this went back when she was 15 years old, and how obsessed she was with him. And at the end of it, 3 years later, he committed suicide. And this monologue was badly acted by Julia Roberts, and I didn't believe her when she said all of this, as it comes out preposterous. And we move on to 5 years later in a snow day with Alma being the principal, I'm guessing is where she's positioned at, as she goes to the same diner Hank took her earlier in the film to meet with Maggie, and she says how sorry she was for doing what she did to Alma 5 years ago. And she says she's engaged to a different woman named Nia, and they met for a short time as Maggie leaves the diner while Alma eats and drinks wine at the diner. And the climax made me think the more Luca Guadagnino makes, the less I like him, as this was a bad movie, but how bad was it? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 3.6 out of 10. The ticking that goes on about 3 times in this movie was distracting, and another thing that was distracting was the score of this movie. And I was thinking, what the fuck is going on in Luca Guadagnino's mind while putting out the score for this movie, as this is not his best film nor his worst, but it's pretty bad. The acting in this is horrendous. Despite Julia Roberts was good in this movie, not great in my opinion, but the other performers were just pretentious throughout, and the cinematography looked awful. And I can't believe once Oscar-nominated Luca Guadagnino is going downhill from Challengers to Call Me By Your Name to this pile of shit, as this is just preposterous. This is not Guadagnino's best film, nor is this worst, like I said, but it was a bad movie. And his career is just going downhill, and this is getting a non-recommendation for me because it is poorly acted with some talented actors, but their performances are just so bad. And I was just not comfortable watching this movie twice for this review, so I wouldn't have bothered having anybody watching this for the life of them. And no wonder they missed it, so thank you for that, as it is just plain bad and too long, as well as I can't believe this is a 2 hour and 19-minute movie for a psychodrama, and that can't truly stand and the more Luca Guadagnino makes, the less I like him. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for coming back for Luca Guadagnino, and until he makes another movie, which, God forbid, whatever.